Carrim and I am the Research Engagement Manager here at KAUST. This event is brought to you by the Office of the Vice President for Research under Professor Donald Bradley. So sadly, this is the last Sci-Café in the series. The next one is in September, and I hope then that it won't be on a virtual platform, that we'll all be together again. Inshallah, as we say in Saudi. If you're not familiar with the format of this event, it goes kind of something like this. We're going to hear from the experts in the field, and then we're going to open up from questions from the audience. So please do give your questions. All questions are relevant. There's no wrong question, and don't hold back. Today's topic is beyond our senses, and where we hopefully will get a snapshot of the sensing technology going on at KAUST. And hopefully we'll discuss how the future will look as we move into this very digital era and the fourth industrial revolution. So sensors are truly all around us and have been for so many years. And when that sliding door opens, that's a sensor. Your mobile phone, it has sensors. Your watch, now iWatches have sensors, and your car, guess what? It has sensors. So they're all around us and they do so many things beyond our own senses. Let me stop there and let me introduce our panelists, and then we can get into kind of some interesting discussion. So Atif, if you unmute yourself and introduce yourself briefly for about 1 or 2 minutes and tell us exactly what you do at KAUST.
Okay, hello everyone, and thank you Nadia and the Sci-Café team for inviting me to this event. My name is Atif Shamim, and I'm from Canada. I joined KAUST early days, like as one of the founding people, 2009. So in Canada, I was working on biomedical sensors, which are integrated with very small wireless readouts in conventional electronics, basically CMOS. And the sensors precisely were dosimeters, like for radiotherapy treatments and all that, jointly with the company Best Medical Canada. When I moved to KAUST around 2009, and KAUST was pretty new, and I found some nice printers in the core labs, and I thought about printing electronics. And then since then I've been working on printing sensors and high frequency electronics, and we're going to talk more about it as this show goes on.
Brilliant, Atif, thank you. Malika, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us exactly what you do at KAUST?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So I would like to thank you to giving me the opportunity to do the Sci-Café. So I am Malika Kheireddine, and I am in KAUST since 2014. I joined KAUST as a postdoc and then became a research scientist in 2018. Before to do the postdoc, I did my PhD in France from the Sorbonne University in Paris. And my main research focused mainly on studying the biogeochemical processes in the ocean and see how those processes are changing in response to climate change using different platforms equipped with different bio-optical sensors.
Excellent, thank you. And Malika, you're a research scientist while the rest of the panelists are professors. So thank you so much for coming on today. Tareq, over to you. Introduce yourself and tell us exactly what you do at KAUST.
Thank you, Nadia, for having me, and thanks to the Sci-Café team. Good day, everyone. My name is Tareq Al-Naffouri. I'm from Saudi Arabia. I'm a professor of electrical and computer engineering, and I have been here at KAUST since 2012. My area of research is signal processing and its applications, and mainly I focus on 3 areas: wireless communications, smart cities, and smart health. Now, some of you could be wondering what signal or data processing is. So what it means is basically pulling meaning from data, pulling meaning or information from data. Now, as Nadia mentioned, there are broad sources of data around us. Your cell phone has, like, around 14 sensors, cameras, proximity sensor, a gravity sensor, a microphone. Your car could have anything between 60 to 100 sensors, and the number of sensors could increase as the car becomes smart and more autonomous, and so on and so forth. So what signal processing does is basically tries to pull meaning out of all these sensing technologies that we have. Now, to give you more, to make the discussion less abstract, I can tell you some of the problems that my lab works on. one area is basically, for example, how can we use GPS technology and how we can make it more reliable. I'm sure many of you have faced the situation where you go, for example, downtown and your GPS receiver starts acting crazy. So how can you make it more reliable? Another example is, for example, how can you pull the ECG of a fetus from the recordings of the ECG of the abdomen of its mother. So these are some of examples of things that I do here with my group.
Excellent, thank you, Tareq. So I guess, Atif, if I go back to you, what exactly are you using sensors for? And what has motivated you to work in the sensor technology space?
Well, sensors, you can see they're everywhere now, and they're going to be everywhere, as we know from the Internet of Things. And so people who are not very familiar with the Internet of Things, because this is going to come up more times in this conversation, so I'll explain. Right now, the way we use Internet is that there are humans on both sides of the chain. So if I send an email, a human reads that email or WhatsApp message and all that. But in the Internet of Things paradigm, non-living things will be on the two sides of the internet. They will receive this information and they will act on them, and they will make smart decisions for you. I typically give an example of, let's say, if you are going for to park your car in a shopping mall, typically you go circles and you find a slot. In the era of Internet of Things, when you're approaching the shopping mall, your car will basically communicate with the shopping mall parking system and say, hey, do you have any spot available? And the parking system says, which shop do you want to go to? And let's say want to go to Gap Kids, and say, okay, yeah, level 3, this, and they will coordinate the locations, and the car will go and guide you there. So these two machines were communicating with each other to make your life easier, right? So that's the kind of future we're looking at. So for me, personally, I'm very interested in the biomedical sensors. As I said, I was doing in my PhD as well. And when I came here, I'm interested in these wearable kind of sensors. So the main motivation is you could basically reduce the time which people spend in clinics and hospitals if you could do some remote monitoring, if you could add remote monitoring or diagnosis, which is required for many cases. For example, chronic wounds, right? So patients are admitted. These are patients whose wounds do not heal. They bleed, they become infectious, they become ulcers. So they need to get admitted to the hospitals and clinics. So this is very expensive, also very inconvenient. So projects like if there's a bandage on your wound, which can basically monitor your wound, you don't have to go to the home and office environment, and you can your information can go to the doctor right away. So you are at the comfort of your home and office, and your information is being sent to the doctor. So I have this small bandage which I'm showing you here. Bring it close. So there is some printed sensor on it.
That's very good. Oh, it just looks like a normal band-aid.
Just like a normal bandage, and we print with special inks or sensors on them, and this can detect bleeding. This can tell if your wound is becoming bad, like there's some infection developing and all that. And this information goes through your Bluetooth link through your phone to the doctor. So for me, this is, I think, a good service to a lot of people, bringing convenience to them, not going into the hospital. So that was the major motivation. So I do a lot of wearable, flexible kind of wireless sensors. So that's kind of my motivation, leading to Internet of Things, whether it's for environmental sensing, whether it's for oil industry, whether it's for biomedical purposes.
Internet of Health, Internet of Sea, Internet of
Sea, exactly.
No, excellent. Thank you. I think there's no limit to sensors, really, and I think you've just said that exactly. Tareq, what about your sensors? What are you using sensors for, and what has motivated you to work in the sensor technology space?
Well, I mean, there are basically two reasons for that kind of motivate me to work with sensors. The first reason is what Atif mentioned, which is basically that sensors are a status quo. They're around us. In fact, some say that by 2025, we'd expect it to have like around 1,000 sensors per inhabitant. This is necessary to make our life, which is increasingly urbanized, sustainable, and to protect the wildlife and the environment and the environment. In fact, NEOM and the line are great examples of such huge deployments of sensors. Now, one thing that we need to realize is signal processing and wireless communications need to be there to enable these sensors. For example, there are so much information that we get from the sensors and the IoT that Atif mentioned, so much data. This data needs to be mined using machine learning, for example. So this data is exponentially increasing. The second reason why you need signal processing is basically no single sensor can do the job. For example, take about autonomous vehicles. Autonomous vehicles, they need a combination of cameras, LiDARs, and radars, so for them to be able to see, because these different kinds of sensors, they complement each other. Third, also sensors are too energy starved. I mean, you can rely on some energy harvesting, but still this cannot do the job. So for example, in my group, we've studied how UAVs, or drones, can prolong the reach and the lifespan of sensors. We've done that, for example, in the context of early detection of forest fires. I mean, as you know, Nadia, we've had so many devastating fires last year. The earlier we can detect these fires, the better. So one thing that our group did is, for example, to suggest that drones hover over the area of interest where they want to collect collect data. They act like remote control, wirelessly activating the sensor, so waking it up, collecting the data, and turning it off again, and then relaying that information to the fusion center. So this is the first reason why I am interested in sensors, because signal processing basically and wireless communications enable that. Now, there is another reason which is closer to my heart, and which is basically the fact that there are unique applications of sensors in this part of the world, in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf region. For example, one problem that we worked on is what's called smart hat or smart Aqal. Now, as we know, we are all guilty of excessive use of smartphones, tablets, and computers. And what this does is many of us will have some comfort in our lower leg, shoulders, and our upper back. And this is known as the tech neck problems. In fact, 45% of office workers suffer from the tech neck. I'm sure many of our audience, can have a similar experience. There are several solutions in the market to deal with this. However, what's special about this part of the world is that men and women, in many cases, cover their head. For example, men cover their head with the Aqal, this piece of that they put on their head. And what we do is basically we put a wearable that you can see here. It's a very small wearable that alerts the user that he or she are having an incorrect posture. I mean, you can put this wearable on a scarf, on a hat, etc. Another also example that's close to my heart is what's called the smart tap. Muslims practice prayer 5 times a day, and as part of that, they have to wash their bodies 5 times a day. And in washing, it's a sequence of action that starts with washing hands, washing mouth, nose, all the way up to legs. And in doing this, basically, we use almost 5 liters of water in each wudu. So in total, 25 liters of water. And unfortunately, much of this water doesn't get used. So what we did is basically using depth cameras and with the aid of machine learning, we are able to predict the motion or to predict the motion of the ablution performer and activate the tap accurately. or like, in real time, and basically control the water flow. And so this results in lots of saving in water usage. So again, like, there are lots of special things related to this part of the world, the Hajj, the Umrah, etc., where there are like, niche applications of sensors.
Oh, excellent, Tareq. Thank you. I don't even think, just this part of the world, because, there's so many Muslims all over the world. And then I think everybody is looking to be more sustainable. Everybody would want this smart tap and, to be less energy intensive. I mean, we use an awful lot of desalinated water in the region, which takes a lot of energy to desalinate this water. So if we were to use less, then we would be using less energy, moving towards a sustainable future. So that sounds fantastic. So, I mean, Atif's kind of gone from the development of sensors in so many applications, health, environmental. And Tareq, you mentioned that by 2025, every person in the world will have, there'll be 1,000 sensors per person in the world. So that's like 1 trillion sensors by 2025. And, we're all looking, this is the complete digital area. We're all looking at our phones and our computers and everything. So we definitely are moving towards this industrial revolution of this digital era. And I also suffer from technic myself. And so, availing of your sensor would help me immensely, I think. And it seems like there's various different applications for sensors all over the world. So Malika, I'll stop rambling now and I'll head over to you. You come from a different side of KAUST. You come from the Red Sea Research Centre here at KAUST, so the biological side. Malika, tell us, what are you using your sensors for?
Yeah, so as I said previously, I mainly focus on the ocean. I don't know if you know, but 95% of the ocean remained unexplored, which makes the ocean like a mysterious world. And you know why? This is because we are limited by our own sense. So we cannot see with our eyes what is happening inside the ocean. Like for us, the surface of the ocean, it always looks the same. We don't know what's going on. So this is why we use sensors to project our senses in order to have a better understanding on what's going on in the ocean. And so there is also something that I would like to raise. This is very important for me. So we should care about the ocean also because the ocean are very essential to support the life on our planet. They regulate the rate of the climate change by absorbing the greenhouse gases. So for example, here we use biooptical sensors in the Red Sea waters because we consider the Red Sea as a laboratory to study how the oceans will behave in the future in response to increase in temperature, increase in the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So we use those sensors, and we are trying to see what would be the capacity of the ocean in absorbing the greenhouse gases and thus in regulating the rate of climate change. So this is mainly what we are doing in our group, but we can also use like sensors to have an idea to be able to monitor what's happening in the ocean and also to be able to identify some spaces, because we can use some camera, underwater camera, and see which kind of species we have and maybe discover new species, for example.
Brilliant, thank you. I love how you said why we should care, because in the prep meeting, that was the question I asked you is, why do we care? Why do we want to sense the ocean? But you're right, it's in what you're saying. The ocean is extremely important. And we previously had a Sci-Café on the Red Sea, and we were talking exactly on that matter of how important the ocean is for us moving forward. Climate change is real. So yeah, thank you so much for your research efforts. They sound extremely important. I just want to remind our audience members at this point that, if you have a question for any of our panelists, please submit it. We'll get to them very, very soon. And I hope there's lots of questions, because I also want to know more about this TechNet sensor. I want to know what we can sense in the deep of the Red Sea, and I want to know more about Atif's environmental sensor as well. So, guys, we have so many sensors, and there's sensors that you can buy in the market as well, just straight off the shelf. I guess we've so many sensors going on, there has to be some challenges or limitations, or, you know, why do we use one sensor over another, perhaps? So Atif, what are the challenges or the limitations that you face with your sensor development, perhaps? Oh, you're on mute, Atif. The beauty of Zoom, beauty of going virtual.
Sorry about that. So that's a good question. I'm going to start answering this by an example. So the typical temperature sensors, for example, you guys have seen, or us growing up as well, you know, the typical thermometers, you know. So if there's a sick child, you're going to put this in the mouth of a child, and, you know, and now you see that there's like these IR based cameras based, but as I'm into the variable and flexible kind of new gen of sensors, so which are not commercially available yet. So that's where I'm going to show you. This are just printed temperature sensors, which are very flexible, just like a sticker. And
so that's their sensors.
This is temperature sensor. This can just go on the body of a child, and with the attached Bluetooth, which I'm not showing you here, this can send information directly to the parent's phone all the time, right? So this is where the sensor technology is going, you know, and this is the difference from conventional or commercial sensors. Now, Tareq said billions and trillions of sensors have to come up in the future, right? So one of the major challenge which I see, and that's why I am in this field of printing those sensors, is that you need some high throughput, which means that you need to be able to fabricate these in a really fast time and lots of them at the same time in large quantities, mass manufacturing, right? So my idea, which may sound a little bit crazy at this point, but you know, that's how we progress in research, that we want to print electronics like newspapers and magazines, like, you know, how roll to roll. If you have seen this image where the newspapers are being printed roll to roll. So that's where I see the future, that if you want to produce billions and trillions of these sensors, so you could have these printed. So that's why we are working on developing inks and making these printed sensors, very low cost sensors. Now, the challenge, as I said, number one is the manufacturing techniques, which should be high throughput and should be able to do the mass manufacturing. Two, when we're going to sensors like the ones I showed you, the smart bandage and these temperature sensors, which are like a sticker, basically they are not packaged or boxed like conventional electronics or conventional sensors. So the reliability issues, the robustness issues, these need to be tackled. Of course, they bring in the factor of low cost, which we are looking at. If you want to do billions or trillions of sensors, the cost better be low, right? So, but those are the issues. Now, another issue on this, like the system aspect, is that from these billions or trillions of sensors is the power, right? Like you cannot put batteries to all of these sensors or wireless sensor nodes. I'm pretty sure Tareq will agree on this. So what we believe in the future, you need to make these guys self-powered, which means that they need to harvest energy, and most like this energy should be ambient. So for example, solar is well known, but you know, we are also working on harvesting electromagnetic energy in the environment, or also harvesting through the day and night cycle, like the temperature change from thermal fluctuations. Those ambient sources should be utilized to harvest energy, so that these sensors could be made battery free. So I think I can list these 2 or 3 major challenges coming up for sensors.
Great. So energy harvesting is utilizing the energy sources already around us. I worked with you before on this energy harvesting, and it was new to me that we could get energy from the temperature fluctuation, which is fab. And we can combine that with solar and also radio frequency as well. Yeah, that's brilliant. And then I was thinking maybe accuracy is also another challenge. When I see your temperature sensor there, I think, okay, how different is that to putting the thermometer under the tongue? And what about nowadays, like with COVID going on, we go into stores or shops or the clinic, and you look straight up at a phone and it takes your temperature. Accuracy, it can't always be accurate, right? You know, that's definitely going to be another challenge.
Definitely. Yeah, you're right.
Excellent. Thank you, Atif. Malika, what about your sensing technologies, what are the challenges or the limitations that you face?
Yeah, so we are mainly using manufactured sensors. So here you have an example. So this is a sensor that we attach to our robot and that we deployed underwater. And this sensor particularly is measuring 3 parameters. The concentration in phytoplankton. So the phytoplankton, they are the tiny plants that we have in the ocean. It will also give us a concentration of dissolved organic matter and the concentration in particles. So the problem with those sensors is that they are limited by available power. They can be corroded by salt water, and they can be fooled by tiny organisms. That is a very big problem for us. And also they drift over time. So it means that we cannot use these sensors for a very long period. They drift and then we need to calibrate them. This is very important for us. And all those limitations, this is problematic for us because it will affect the accuracy of our data. Then something else is when we are using those sensors, we are collecting data at different spatio-temporal scale. So we can have data from the microsecond to decades, or from a tiny point in the ocean to the global ocean. And the thing that is limits us is then we obtain a very huge data set. So we need to use artificial intelligence to integrate those data collected from different sensors, because we don't use only one. We use systems with different sensors on it. So we need to use artificial intelligence to be able to use those data and then interpret those and try to understand what is the functioning of the ecosystem, and why not to predict future environmental conditions.
Brilliant, thank you. So with using all these sensors, you're going to get this large data set. We've got big data. Yes. And how to handle that. I mean, I guess the future is big data if the future is sensors, right? If we're going to have 1 trillion sensors by 2025, and you're using AI tools then to handle this big data, but it's still an issue. It's still a challenge. Another thing I was thinking of, Malika, was, you know, this environment of under the water. That's going to be pretty harsh or extreme for your sensors too. I mean, especially when it comes to the Red Sea, which is where most of your experiments take place. It's very saline, so there's a high salt content. It's really hot. So it's also another challenge there as well, perhaps.
Yeah, the fact that the water are very warm. In some areas, the sensors can maybe use for 6 months. In our case, it's maybe 2 months. Otherwise, it will not be accurate for the data. So we mainly need to clean them, or we have some backup, so we change them, and then we do the calibration and we turn it again.
Wow, yeah, that's pretty costly.
It's very challenging. It's costly, but it's still less costly than going on a cruise, because going on a cruise to rent the boat, we need staff. And this is more costly when we are using the boat than using those sensors.
Okay, good to know. Tareq, what are the challenges or the limitations that you face when it comes to your sensing research?
Well, actually, you alluded to it, Nadia. Basically, it's scaling up all these technologies to extreme environments, like, for example, underwater and underground. I mean, underwater, Malika, made the case of why this is important, and how it's important for the whole well-being of the planet. Underground for oil and gas exploration. So the thing is that the main challenge I see is that many of the techniques that we use for terrestrial, applications, on the ground, don't scale up to these environments. For example, talk about localization. You want to know exactly where the sensor is located. You cannot rely on GPS technology underwater or underground. Talk about energy harvesting. I mean, you don't have, Atif talked about, for example, variation in temperature between day and night, which is something that might not be accessible deep in the ocean. You don't have access to, like, you know, RF harvesting. Another example is basically, like, you know, RF, we take RF signaling as a given to transmit data from one place to another. This is not the case anymore underwater. So underwater, for example, if you want to send for long distances, then I mean, you have a kind of like a dilemma. If you want to send for long distances, you need to rely on ultrasound, but ultrasound can only send very small amounts of data. While if you want to have, like, you know, you can rely on, for example, light to transmit higher amounts of data, but light can only penetrate for like, you know, for small ranges. So basically, like, you know, scaling up I mean, one last point here I want to mention here. You know, I talked about drones and how they can extend the reach and the time life of sensors. You cannot do that anymore underground, or it's much more challenging to do it underwater.
Excellent, thank you, Tareq. So actually what you're doing is you're providing solutions whilst your drones are coming along and communicating with the sensors down below. And we're not using a lot of energy when it comes to these sensors, right? Perhaps they're on low power mode, and then, you know, the drone comes along and it wakes it up and then it takes the data. How can we do this underground, or how can we do this underwater? These really harsh environments, they just make such a difference. Yeah, I completely appreciate that.
Yeah, actually, I want to add one last point, if I may. The other thing, for example, which is also challenging, validating all these algorithms and like procedures. Validating it, like, you know, on the ground, you know, in the lab is very easy, but doing it, actually validating it underwater, that's a nightmare.
That's the future, perhaps.
Yeah.
Actually, that might segue us into the next question quite nicely. But before I go there, I do see some questions coming in from the audience members, but just a kind reminder that, you know, please get your questions in so our panelists can answer them. I guess where I was going with that was, what is the future of sensor technology? What will it look like in about 5 to 10 years down the road? If we're talking about by 2025, we're going to have 1 trillion sensors on the planet Earth. Atif, what's your take on this?
I think sensors are becoming very important, and they'll be a very important part of our lives, right? And we say that we talk about variables, we talk about Internet of Things, but we are not seeing those sensors yet. So what I see in the future is, in the coming years, that people will be wearing a lot of sensors. So I gave you examples. I already gave you examples of few variable sensors. Also believe that more kind of mobile or disposable kind of low-cost sensors. Let's say I give you an example for environmental monitoring, right? So Tareq was talking about forest fire, you know, and coming from Canada, I know there's like huge national parks there, and you know, when or places like Australia, when the fire goes in, you don't know when it started and how far. So it is very hard to put infrastructure in large areas for large area monitoring. Like, for example, for forest fire, you're covering 400 kilometers square or something. It's very expensive, very hard. So what Tareq was talking about, I show you a physical implementation of that. This is just a small cube, 3D printed, which has sensors printed on its walls, basically temperature, humidity, gas sensors, gas sensing. So these are very low cost.
Tiny little thing can sense gas,
yes,
humidity,
exactly.
temperature.
Yeah. They can sense temperature, they can sense what is the humidity level, they can sense the gas. This one is particularly designed for H2S gas, which comes mostly from sewerage and all that, but we have done other gas sensors, and they can be, so they're all specific inks which we develop, and they can be printed. So these are very low cost, right? So almost to be disposable. So from the drones, you can drop them into large areas, right? So for example, these guys are sitting there, so they can become our like ears or noses or, you know, eyes. So this is exactly the topic of your Sci-Café, right? Beyond our senses. So that's I think a very, very befitting example. That's what I see, that sensors will be everywhere in the environment, on the bodies. Variable, the world industry is also going towards digitizing everything. So we will see a lot of sensors around us, and the information coming from those sensors will be vital for our day-to-day operations. Like these guys, this will be making decisions for us, small decisions for us, right? So we will be relying on them. So I think that they are very important. And however, as you mentioned, the privacy with all this data coming in from the body and the environment, that's a whole
definitely a security issue there, or a privacy issue there for sure, that someone somewhere in the future will have to deal with.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not doing that.
But it's already happening, right? I mean, we already have our phones. There's already an issue there at the moment. We've got our sensors in our phones. So I think, yeah, it's just about handling that moving forward. But I agree with you. There will be sensors all over the place in the future. We will have your smart wearables, your smart flexible sensors. Absolutely. That is the future. Thank you, Atif. Tareq, where do you see the future of sensor technology?
Well, I mean, if you think about it at a higher level of abstraction, a sensor has, there are three issues that are associated with a sensor. First, you need to sense some kind of a phenomena, pressure, gas, temperature, etc. Second, you need to localize the place of that sensor. You want its location. And third, you want to communicate that data to some fusion center to make use of it. Okay, now, what I see happening in the future, and this is something that actually our group is starting to work on, is basically the convergence of all of these functionalities together. And one way that one vehicle that could, through which this could happen is what's called terahertz communications. Terahertz, if you want, is a huge RF spectrum band that lies between the visible light and millimeter wave. And millimeter wave is basically the band that's being used for the 5G wireless communications. So it's a huge band of frequency, and that huge band has very interesting properties. First of all, because it's very large, you can use it actually for sending huge amounts of data. Second, because it has light-like properties, meaning it's very directional, and because of the small wavelength, you can actually do very accurate localization. And third, because of its specificity, it's actually is able to sense material and gases very well. There are special resonant frequencies for every gas and every material. And fourth, actually, it can also do actual imaging. So not only can you sense what material do you have, but actually you can also image the object that you have. So in a way, this technology, the terahertz, you can piggyback all these functionalities, the communication, the localization, the sensing, and the imaging, all in one technology. This is one direction. I think that's going to be very important in the future. And actually, Atif is an expert in this technology. He can say more. And we have Professor Salim Alwini, who's a collaborator and also another expert in this technology. So this is where I see the future going.
Very impressive, Tareq. Thank you. And it's clear that, the panelists today, you guys, it's just a snapshot of what's going on in case. I think there's a lot more going on. Malika, do you have any final thoughts on the future of sensor technology?
So I believe we are entering a new era with a changing way of observing the ocean. So I think we will use more integrated systems, and we really need to get smaller sensors. So we need to miniaturize the sensors that are more powerful, cost-effective, and more accurate for the data. So this is something that this is how I see the future. And also, I believe that we will soon wire the oceans with sensors and be able to relay data on real time.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. We'll be wiring the ocean in the future. That's where we're going. Internet of Sea, which is something actually Atif has already coined here in KAUST. We actually have a lot of stuff going on in the Red Sea when it comes to sensor technology. We have floating receivers for sensors on fish. We have underwater wireless communication going on in KAUST. So there's a lot going on in that space. I definitely see that as being the future. So let me turn to some of the questions from the audience members. Actually, Malika, the first one's for you. How many sensors are deployed and how is the data collected? Is it in real time? And that comes from Sonia.
Okay. So thank you for the question. So the number of sensors, it really depends on which platform we are using. So it can be 2, 3, or 10. And it also depends on the battery capacity because we are limited by the battery. So for example, on the gliders, I think we are maybe 5 or 6 sensors, but we can have more. And then we are using a cage where we attach different sensors, and we can have up to 10. But it really depends on the battery. Then the data are, when they are deployed on the robots, we collect them in real time. So we communicate with the satellite communication. Or we can also use like a hard drive, and we can store the data inside. And when the scientist is coming back from the sea, we retrieve the data and we look at them. Yeah.
Excellent. Cool. Tareq, the next question's for you. Could we use regular IR taps with better sensitivity to save water? And that comes from Safwan.
Yeah, that's a good question. Definitely, I mean, like the IR taps are a complete technology, but I mean, from our own experience, you know, the IR taps basically they're not as responsive as you want them to be. So I'm sure, I mean, many of us experience this where you put your hands under the tap and it does not, like, you know, do any action, and then you remove your hands and the water is still flowing. So basically the one based on depth camera or an RGB camera is more nimble. So is able to kind of first predict what action you want to take and dispense the water. And what more actually is it's going to predict the actual action. So it could also control the flow of the water, how much water is being dispensed.
Wow, that sounds very, very smart. Because even now when you go in and you know, wash your hands and you put your hand under even for the soap and it doesn't work and you're like this, and the minute you pull away, the soap comes out. And the same with the water. So I'm looking forward to that. Guys, look, I think we'll leave it there because we've hit the 45-minute mark. I know there's a couple of more questions. Okay, well, let me just take one more question because it does look good. How are the raw materials for IC in sensors procured locally? This is a nice question. Does the current chip shortage related to your research and bringing to market? I don't quite understand the last one, but could any of you answer that question? If you can see it in the chat. How are the raw materials for IC and sensors procured locally?
So typically, if I understand this question, he's talking about because integrated circuits are separate. There could be sensors which are integrated circuit based.
Thank you for telling me what IC is.
So integrated circuits are basically like the IC technology, which is used commonly in all your electronics, like your phones and everything. Sensors could be in the IC technologies, or sensors may not be in the IC technology. For example, my sensors are not using IC technology, which is maybe a bit more sophisticated, but small area. Because the small wafers or small ICs are fabricated at the same time, not very suitable for large area manufacturing. So if I try to understand the question, how are the raw materials for ICs in sensors procured locally? I don't think so. The ICs are fabricated locally, because these are big foundries which are, I think so, like a $5 to $6 billion a single foundry. In KAUST, we have a great core labs where we actually we can fabricate these transistors and devices. But commercial scale, of course, these are done in the foundry. So typically, the people who are doing with the ICs, they do the design, and then they will send their files to an international foundry, and that foundry will fabricate the chips or ICs, and they will send it back to you. They not necessarily be the sensors may not be in IC technology, they can be in any other technology.
Thank you, Atif. There is a question regarding, privacy related to all this data collection, but we did touch on it. I mean, that could be another Sci-Café in itself. I guess, does anybody very quickly have anything to say regarding that? Because in my opinion, as a consumer, I already feel like I'm giving a lot of my data away. Yeah, I don't know. Does anybody have anything to say about that?
Well, one thing I have to say, this is definitely, a whole sci-fi topic by itself. And as you know, Nadia, we have a cybersecurity center that was recently established at KAUST. But what I would say actually is this is a big question, and it seems that also our notion of privacy is changing. What we accept to be, what we're willing to disclose about ourselves is changing as we go. But definitely, this is a big question.
Okay, I love your answer. I'm very glad that I asked it because it's quite true. I guess humans, we are adapting to a different world. So perhaps we're more accepting of these things. But yes, that could be a whole Sci-Café topic in itself. So let's just not go there for now. And yeah, Tareq, you made a great point. We have a new research center in KAUST, the Cybersecurity Research Center. So who knows, we could provide the solution. Guys, I think I'll leave it there. We could go on forever. I know I could go on forever listening to you talk about sensors. It is just fantastic to learn how KAUST research, so you guys are pushing the boundaries of sensor technology in the world. I guess there's so many sensors, so there's going to be big data and you're going to come across issues. But you guys will provide those solutions, and we have other researchers that can provide those solutions. The future does look like we will be surrounded by sensors. Perhaps they'll be a little bit smaller. They'll definitely be flexible and wearable, and they'll have a better battery life. But yeah, the future is sensors, and I do think they will bring us into a more sustainable world. Definitely terahertz and sensor fusion, and of course our wired ocean, or our wireless ocean, it will become like that. So look, it's clear that there's so many different applications, and what you're doing is absolutely fantastic, because as a biologist it almost goes over my head. So thank you all so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And thank you to our audience members for listening. And to our audience members, if you want to learn more about KAUST research, you can go to discovery.kaust.edu.sa. You can even sign up for our bi-weekly newsletters. You can actually revisit older Sci-Cafés on YouTube. And thank you for listening, and we'll see you in September. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.